All right.
Hey,
Hey,
all right. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today at this webinar. I'm Anne from Melbourne, Australia, and before I start, I would like to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I am really excited today to be joined by these incredible gentlemen who will introduce themselves in a minute. But I have Dr. Robin Hadley, who is a world leading researcher in the area of male childlessness. We have Robert Nurdin, author, playwright, and People's Champion for 2025, and Michael Hughes, fellow Australian, co-founder of the Full Stop podcast and a fantastic advocate for our childless community. So over to you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we can get into our conversations.
hi,
Dr. Robin Hadley, how about we start
that's
with you?
me. You can call me Rob, or idiot, or whatever, really. I respond to most things as long as there's some sort of attention there. Yeah, so I'm childless not by choice through a range of circumstances, um, divorce, partner choice, um, that sort of thing over time. And I've done some studies on the impact of male childlessness, mainly because I trained as a counsellor in my mid 40s. So that'd be in the mid 2000s, the noughties. There we go, the naughty noughties, but not for me. And that's when I really found out there wasn't much around men and the desire for fatherhood and what not becoming a father meant. Although I was really broody in my 30s, and that's what sparked my investigation into that. And I was so really investigating, was I the only one who felt so terribly broody because there was nothing around men and their experience, and found out I wasn't the only one, and that in fact there's more childless men than childless women. And then I did an MSc and then a PhD, but all really looking at the impact of male childlessness or unwanted male childlessness. And that's me. I'm in Manchester. I'm in sunny Manchester today in the UK. That's me.
I,
Michael, do you want
I'm
to introduce yourself? I'm just going down the screen.
okay. Yep, sure. So mine is Michael Hughes. I'm one half of a childless marriage, one third of a childless podcast, as mentioned before. And I'm coming to you from Wollongong, New South Wales, which is probably about 1,000 kilometres north of where Anne is. And this is also the traditional land of the Dharawal people. And in my opinion, the best place to live on earth.
Oh, I don't know
Now,
about that. Might be.
yeah, hold my beer. And so, yeah, I've fallen into the childless space because Vicky and I, my lovely wife, have had to deal with infertility. And so, yeah, look, here I am.
Thank you. Robert Nurdin?
Hi, I'm Robert. Like Rob, I'm childless by circumstance, childless not by choice. Something I came to acknowledge and realize quite late in life, but certainly in my late 50s and early 60s. I'm now in my 70s. And having come from a journalism and teaching background, um, when I realized this about myself, being childless not by choice, it was a natural route to go and try and write about it. But as Rob has pointed out, there was very little out there. Um, and it I just had to forge ahead and write. I started off with a play, which didn't do anything and was in a dusty corner of my laptop for a couple of years, called Empty. And out of that came a book called I Always Wanted to Be a Dad, which some of you may know. And that received quite a bit of attention in the press and telly and radio, and lots of support from people in the childless community, which was absolutely wonderful. So the shot in the dark, so to speak, proved to be worthwhile. And then that after doing that, I returned to the play, which I'm involved with at the moment. And some of you may have seen it at an extract performed at Storyhouse last weekend. And prior to that, the week before, the whole performance of it in London. So it it was well enough received for me now to be foolish enough to try and get the whole thing put on sometime next year, probably. So that's where I stand on it. I'm all for getting the message, the very complicated message that we're all part of, out there. So that's my bag, really.
Thank you. Yes, the whole silence around male voices. That was something that captured my attention a few years ago. That's how Robin and I met. I was trying to find information around male childlessness, and there wasn't much. So I emailed Rob and said, I can't find anything. What am I doing wrong? And Rob's response was, there actually isn't that much out there. So when it comes to questions like, do you have kids? We women get that question all the time. And it can range from mildly annoying to extremely frustrating. So I was wondering, do you guys get that question very often? And how does that land with you? Robin, could you shed some light on this from the point of view around male broodiness? Because I think that was one of your first articles that I read. And I was really surprised because I did not know that men got broody. Um, can you shed some light on how this question lands?
How it lands. I think it depends. It depends on the situation, but also the sort of social cultural thing, uh, environment that you're in. So I think culture and the society you're in really has to be acknowledged. But in my sort of working class Mancunian culture, and where I worked, which is I think where this really came in with my peer group, particularly in 20s and 30s, maybe and 40s. There's no narratives for men to occupy on that. Whereas, as you're saying, all the narratives a lot around women and how that feels and the expectation of women that you're going to be a mother, and if you're not a mother, then you failed in some way, or you have to justify that position. One of the things that are sort of thrust on men is that you're fully fertile from puberty until death. And so the social narrative then is, well, you can have kids anytime. So there's sort of an exclusionary element there that keeps the focus on the women, but excludes the men as well. Not only that men are sort of raised to be unemotional and detached from their emotional selves, whereas possibly you could argue women are raised to be too attached to their emotional selves in a way. That's if you're not emotional as a woman, then if you're not nurturing, there's something wrong with you. The reverse being for men, well, you don't have to be nurturing. You're a bit weird if you are. And who does that benefit in society? I think. So there's that myth that you're fully fertile, and then that feeds into, well, we don't need to have any narratives around childlessness for men because they're not bothered and they're not interested, and it's a sort of a convenient truth. But if we're any species that requires a male and a female, if either of them weren't interested in reproducing, they wouldn't reproduce, they'd die out. But we haven't died out. We're incredibly good at reproducing. And if we weren't, we wouldn't be talking like this. So just on that sort of fact, yeah, men must have a desire to reproduce, not only a biological one, but also an emotional desire. And I think certainly in my 30s, I really felt that. I'm going to go into street talk now in Mancunian. Definitely in my 30s. My sacks were heavy. I was desperate to be a dad. Thank you, Michael. And I reckon, if I said to my mates, my sacks are heavy, they'd know exactly what I mean. Whereas if I said I'm really broody, that would be, oh, come on, you're a bit strange for that. And I think that's why men tend to just talk to somebody who's very close to them. So usually their partner, they'll express deep feelings if they can. But let's not forget that society tends to reinforce that disconnect between the internal, the emotional man, and the external. So how are men validated and verified? It's what they do. What do you do for a living? How successful are you outside yourself? Not the emotional side, but outside yourself. And outside yourself, I'm including the brain in that Descartesian manner. That's a good thing to bring in for this time in the morning, isn't it? The mind body split, and you could say the reverse is true for women. It's it's your body. Don't be bothered thinking too much. It's a product of your body that validates you, that gives you existential validation, and it's outside the body that validates men. That's all very technical, isn't it? After going for my sacks are heavy, we get the full range here. Absolutely.
That's a really
Does that
good,
help?
It does, and it's a really good segue into another question that I actually wanted to ask you, Rob.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about virility proved by fertility.
Yeah.
So when people ask the question, do you have kids? With that lens in mind, again, how does that actually land in the black hole of the heart?
In the black hole of the heart, we all build defenses. And I think one of the defenses for men, but also for society, oh, well, because I can have kids at any time, I'm having fun practicing. I'm sowing my wild seeds at various times. So they're the handy sort of defense shields. Defense shields are up, and we're all playing that game. I'm giving you this answer. We both know deep inside it's not valid, but you're not coming in, and actually, I don't want to be into your internal world in that. So how does it land? In my mid 30s, one of my colleagues became a dad, and we were good mates, and we worked down the same corridor. We used to have brews and lunches together and all that sort of thing. And I was so jealous. I mean, so jealous I couldn't face him. I couldn't be in his company around that. So that's how it landed then for me, and my behavior was just to avoid him as much as possible until we had a chat. And he said, what's wrong? Because we used to get on well, and now it's not. And I said, well, you've got the life I should have. And that's what I felt like, on the ideal track of life, the ideal arc of life. In the mid-30s, you're there at the peak, and I wasn't. In fact, I was on a very much shallower arc, and there's a vast difference that I didn't know how to fill between the ideal and the actual.
It's so complex, isn't it? And, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Robert, your book is so emotional. To be honest, I actually had to stop reading it because I started crying. And I don't cry very often at books, but it was so raw and so emotional around what it means not to have a dad, or not to be a dad, sorry. How do you find it when people ask you, do you have kids? And has your response or your internal dialogue changed from when you were younger to now?
Mm. Well, as you say, Anne, and everybody who's involved with this, it's just highly, highly complex and nuanced, and every one of us four has a different history, and what is true of one person is not necessarily true of another. So I came to articulate the fact that I was childless, not by choice, quite late, but thinking back, I was experiencing the loss and the grief without really knowing what it was, as my peers got married and had children, and and I sort of became increasingly removed from their lives. Um, and I just got on with living, and but didn't really realize what was happening till later. So that to go back to what you said in your introduction, do men get asked that question? Do you have any kids? Less than women? Well, certainly I think so, and I think that perhaps the two guys might bear that out as well. I'm not sure, but certainly. I get asked it from time to time. But as I was a travel writer, so traveling abroad, I got asked it more abroad in more traditional societies, thinking about it, um, in Asia and in Africa. So that's interesting. I think Europe has a more uh, deals with the complexity of infertility um, and just childless not by choice in a different way. So if I'm asked that question, it key some of the key factors are who's asking it and why and in what situation, which is what Robin has just pointed out as being all important. Um, and I use my intuition about when I get asked that question. Simply, what do I think of this person? Do I like this person? Do I hear genuine interest in their behind their question, or is there something else going on which is to do with trying to define me early on in meeting them, and that brings in status. So as you get older, as I've got older, behind that question is also the question of status and also being a grandparent is almost as one has worked through the grief of never becoming the dad you wanted to be. The next thing that rears up behind that question is, I'm not a grandparent either, which is a huge event for older people who spend a lot of their time looking after their children's children. That, of course, doesn't happen either. So I have a rate. I think Michael was talking earlier about being prepared for that question and having an answer ready or a range of answers ready, depending on the situation. And that struck me when I heard him say that. That's just incredibly sensible as a way of protecting yourself against it becoming a very emotional conversation. I haven't I haven't got to that point, and perhaps it's too late now. I can probably handle it. So who's asking and whether I like them, and is there going to be following on from my answer, which is no, I don't have kids. An interesting conversation where we can actually exchange ideas. That's to the point. If my sort of rationale is to explain to people the impact of childlessness, or childlessness gets into every nook and cranny of life, explaining that one, that's a good introduction. And then it also depends on me, and at what stage in my life I'm asked that question. If it was 8 or 10 years ago, before I wrote these two pieces of work, my answer would be it could be all over the place. It could be emotional. It could be angry. It could go anywhere. and sometimes it did. But now the writing the book and the play, particularly the book, has been a catharsis. It's helped me hugely working through, and all the fantastic support I got from other people in the childless community, absolutely massive. Um, and because there are so many more women who've articulated their pain over being childless, much of the majority of that support came from women, and less so from men, just because, as we've already said, men are very silent about this. So it depends on me, it depends on the questioner, it depends on the situation. Are you at a party with a pint of beer in your hand, or what's going on? So there are no rules about it. But increasingly that question it's got so many nuances behind it. And one of the recent ones that I still haven't found an answer to is about being a grandparent or not being a grandparent. So for now, that's my answer.
Thank you. It is very emotional, and it is a question I hate. And of course, being a woman, I get asked that all the time. Do you have kids? And the internal dialogue that goes on. And I really do fall into a black hole, because it's like, how do I answer this? What do I do? What's this person actually trying to ask? Are they trying to find a bit of rapport, or are they trying to be, smug and get a one-upness? So I've worked through a whole lot of different ways to answer the question. But before we go into that, I try to avoid the question, basically. But Michael, speaking with you, you have a very interesting take on when people ask, do you have kids? And sometimes you actually initiate the conversation, whereas I avoid it like, it was some big virus.
Yeah, since we've talked before this live recording, I've refined my answer a little bit. It's not different, but I think it's important to understand that as I've got older, I can recognise that what can actually be true at the same time is my acceptance of being childless, but then my resilience to actually go out into the community, which I appreciate some people don't have. And so what that allows me to do is actually welcome that question. And yes, I do get asked it, because I work in the construction materials industry. So a lot of men who pride themselves on having big families, and so I do get that question a lot. But when I get it, in my mind, it's all right. You've asked the question, now you got to stick around for the answer. And I think this is about being the advocate. Where I tell them that I don't have kids. Well, my initial answer is, sadly, I don't have children, but I don't give them a chance to respond, because then I go into the story of why. I go into the story of 20% of the population, and they pretty much get hammered. But what it does do, and the reason I keep doing it, is because, one, you're educating people. You actually you're getting the childless to be seen, because, as we know, that is a big issue for our community. And the other one is I discover more childless people. So in my recent trip, I've traveled 6 hours today in the car to get here home, because I was away for work. I've met 3 people who are childless just this week by just having this conversation. And so that is why I welcome the question.
That is such an interesting take. And, I'm very inspired by that, because it's taken me a while to be brave enough to talk about being childless not by choice. There's a whole lot of stuff around there as well. But I love what you said about resilience. How do you think that's come about?
It's come about by a number of different ways, and what we're doing right now is one of them.
Mhm.
So what our listeners and watchers don't know is that I've met every one of you, and I've hugged every one of you. And so just let me tell you that Anne's she does a mean lamb shanks, by the way. So I feel lucky that I've had that. So I've met you all in person, and that is a big part of how I build resilience. Because again, I'm speaking as an advocate, and it feels weird because I'm talking about myself, but I find that when I go and have that conversation with people, I'm not having that conversation for me or Vicky. I'm having that conversation for you all.
Mm.
And so
Yep.
meeting you, getting to know you all, sitting and having a cup of tea with Robin in his house and his wife and his dog. Vicky still loves your dog, by the way, Robin. And then having a beer with Robert at St Pancras Station, and then at the Childless event in Chester. These are the things that build that resilience, because you're also telling your story more. The more you tell your story, the more you can normalize that as well. And the emotions are more easily to manage over time. And 10 years on the psychologist's couch as well. So that's another I'm a big part of that as well. So if anyone finds it heavy, my advice would be get help. But there's a lot of childless counsellors out there that do fantastic work and will get you, and that will help you build resilience to then perform normally in everyday society. Because as we spoke before, it's unreasonable to not expect to live a life and not become in contact with people who have children, or people who are parents, and people who are proud of their kids and family. And so we need to build resilience. So then, and I'd use it in inverted commas, perform normally in everyday society. Hope that makes sense.
So, yeah, it does. So community and connection is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Helps build that resilience. And I relate to that so well because, I mentioned earlier, it's taken me a long time to be brave to start talking about being childless, not by choice. And a lot of that actually started with a conversation with Stephanie in 2017, I think it was, or 2018, I can't remember. But to find a whole community, a whole week dedicated to us was like, hey, I'm not alone. There's so many of us out there. And building that community, building that connection has helped me become 2017, Stephanie's just said, the first WCW. Yeah, and it's kind of helped with that. Okay, I'm not alone. It's okay. I can talk about this. There are people out there who get me. But one of the things also when I get asked, do you have kids? My internal dialogue goes at warp speed 9 or maybe 10, if there is a warp speed 10 for any Trekkies out there. Because between the few seconds between being asked the question and trying to answer it, what's going through my mind is, what do I say? What is the inevitable next question that's going to come up? If I say no, am I dishonoring my twins who are not Earthside? Are they going to ask me why not? And all the rest of it. Because in my younger days, I used to get the, why not? And so for me, it's that internal dialogue that goes completely nutty around how to answer the question. The other side of that is also, we are childless not by choice due to male infertility. So for a very long time, that was my secret, in a word, to hold, because I felt sharing that was not my story to share. So I kept that quiet, and I carried the blame and the shame of infertility. In my culture, it's a big thing. Because I felt I can't tell you why I don't have children. So I had that going on as well. But again, meeting other childless people, having community, having connection does build up that resilience and I guess that bravery to start talking about it. By the way, my husband knows I'm talking about his story here, so it's okay, shared with permission. But yes, Robin, you've got a question.
Hi, it's not a question, it's just to follow on from what Michael was saying. I think since I started doing the research on it, then my interactions with people is very much like Michael. You know, I'm not a dad, but I did want to become one. Did you know that there's more childless men than childless women, and that it's not all infertility? There are so many factors, particularly finance and economics, locally but globally as well, that influence that. But I'd actually become a bit of a shark on finding their stories. But quite often people will say, well, my brother, my relative, as Michael was saying, their child. I've never thought about it in that way in the past, and the amount of particularly women then uh, tell you about their losses and how deeply it affects them. But quite often there's an educational element in doing that. And when I was doing my research and the guys were telling me, and one of the things they always said was something's missing. That was like a key phrase. And it was, there was something missing in their lives and in their hearts, but also there was something missing in society. And that's what we're doing here, that Michael's pointed out there, is actually filling in the something missing. And so Celeste was saying she maybe can lower her defenses in the future. And the thing is, you can practice and just get off a little, few sentences that tells your story, but invites other people in without revealing too much to go inside if you don't want. So I think that's a big thing. I am just going to give a shout out to a book called Male Infertility by Marie Claire Mason from the 1990s, and it's really one of the first books. She was a journalist, still is, about male infertility, and it was about her and her husband's experience. And it's a lovely book. I just think we should acknowledge that this was the 1990s when she wrote it, and it's now what, 30 years later, and we're still discussing it, and it's still not a widely known thing, although I think it is gaining traction through things like World Childless Week. But talking to those men and acknowledging that there wasn't much out there made me think, well, actually, I should stand up now for them. I should put my head above the parapet because their stories need to be told, and we need to fill that gap in narrative.
Yeah. Well, you guys are really inspiring because I think that's probably one of the things I'd like to do when I grow up, which may or may not happen. But being able to advocate, but also being able to educate, around do you have kids is actually a very loaded question. Because there could be a whole lot of reasons why somebody may not be in the right head or heart space to answer that question. Like there's us who are childless, but there are also a whole lot of people who are estranged from their children, and that's a painful question as well. So maybe one of the things that we could get better at doing, and I'm talking about society as a whole, is to actually think about those icebreaker questions that we ask. Instead of do you have kids, are there other questions that could be asked when we're trying to get to know somebody? I was traveling through Japan for work years and years and years ago, and not once did anybody ask me if I had children or who was looking after the children while I was away from work. And I came back from that trip thinking, wow, nobody actually asked that question. I don't know whether the Japanese society was just really polite. But there were so many interesting icebreaker questions, that people were saying. So again, I think one of the things I'm trying to learn is having a toolkit and a little with having different answers, or even when I meet someone, practicing to ask more general questions and then seeing where the conversation goes.
Mm.
Yeah, you're
Well,
nodding, Robert.
one of the things in writing the book I discovered was about how rare older fathers are. And Jody Day very kindly looked at the manuscript, or one part of it, and there was a reference to older fathers and this stereotype that men can go on procreating for till they die, which is absolutely wrong. That the sperm quality in the 30s and 40s declines rapidly, and that has massive knock-on effect further down the line. And of course, the media are to blame for talking up all these miracle births and Robert De Niro and Charlie Chaplin and all these older dads are held up as being something to admire, but it's extremely rare, and that's just medical fact. That we're talking about the educational side of this, of just letting people know things that are not widely known. I think that's hugely important.
Mm. Yep,
On that
definitely.
very same thing is how vulnerable men are, how vulnerable their sperm is to their environment. So smoking, drinking, toxins in the environment, all that sort of thing. Really, there's more and more evidence coming out from that, from the biological, scientific side of things around that. And it's really interesting that if you want to be a sperm donor, the age limit is around about 35 as a volunteer sperm
Okay.
donor. Most fertility clinics won't take you on after that. If you're if
Mm.
you're paying, then obviously different rules apply, and they'll
Hmm.
they'll 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 use your sperm if they possibly can. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's really interesting around the age, and certainly the men I was talking to, 35 like me was the age where I really peaked broodiness, but it was inside. I couldn't express it
Mm.
at all. I was just bloody moody, really. And I'm just going to go on the factors of the circumstances that can affect you. So I was married in my 20s and then divorced just before 30. We tried for kids and then didn't try for kids and moved on. And then I was in a relationship in my mid 30s, and the woman there said, I want to have your babies. And one of my regrets is I didn't jump those bones right there and then. Instead, I was really mature and sensible. Was let's think about this, but we broke up.
Mm.
Mm.
So just circumstances, relationships, me as well. I was quite
Yep.
shy as a late getting into the relationship game,
Yep.
partly due to my upbringing and finances as well. I wasn't rich. I wasn't career
Mm.
orientated at all. So those are the circumstances and how
Yeah.
vulnerable men are. So if you're from low income, low education, you're probably going to be in environments that are more toxic to your health.
Yep.
I thought
So,
something. It's
yeah, again, there's that little bit that what I'm hearing is also there's grief and loss there. So again, an innocent question like, do you have kids, can bring that up again, can't it, Robin? It's like, well, no, I don't have kids, but you don't know my backstory. So again, do you have kids? It's not really a very innocent question.
No, and it's a bonding. It's can you fit into my group question?
Mm.
And if you're not in my group, then why would I waste my time on you? Because the reinforcement of being, of validation. So again, that validated via virility, and our virility is not only biological, it's social and economic, but status-wise within society, as Robert was saying and Michael said as well, parenthood has a lot of kudos in all societies. Sometimes it's really overt, other times it's really covert, but it's there. And and as Robert was saying, it's across the life course. So do you not have grandkids, that sort of thing. And for older men, then actually older men take an interest. So I'm really broody. I'm really interested in kids, but I'm very aware that I'm an older man, and that is going to be viewed as a threat and strange, although it's not strange. It's quite natural. And again, reinforces why we're such a successful species, is this empathy and support between adults and their offspring, and the investments within that.
Yeah.
I think
Janine's put up a comment there. People's asked the question, how many children do you have, with an assumption that everyone must have children. I agree, Janine. That one is a very, very heart-wrenching question. And Juliet's mentioned she had a neighbor who said that she'd been taught not to ask questions. Oh, how lovely. Maybe we should start telling people that as well. I used to work in aged care, and we were actually told, don't ask questions, because for people with dementia, it's really difficult, because then they have to think really hard. So it was always make a statement and then see where the conversation flowed. So, again, I think if we're talking about icebreakers and not wanting people to jump into this black hole, maybe one of the things I would really encourage people out there is, again, communication skills can be learned. So build up your toolkit of things you can say when you meet people without asking them questions. You're looking very thoughtful there, Michael.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of I must be the strange one in the room, because one of the things in my toolkit is I get in first with that question. Have you got kids?
Yeah.
And so so all of a sudden there's a power shift in the conversation. I've got the power because I've started the question, and then they can either answer, "Oh, yes, I have." "Oh, that's nice. What did you do today?" Or what's on the plan for today? It's gone.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other side of it is, if they don't, well, then I'm curious and I don't mind asking why.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the tactics I use.
I think it's possible to exaggerate the divide between childless people and, if you like, the pro-natalist community, which is the majority. There is, in my experience, there's quite a bit of openness and interest in the reasons behind being childless. And going back to my play, without blowing my own trumpet, when the play was on at the Cockpit the weekend before last, most of the audience were parents. A lot of my friends, there were hardly anybody there who identified themselves as childless. So that was very different in Chester the following weekend. So completely different audiences. And the theme of the play, which is about unwanted childlessness, two characters. One, the woman is suffering from going through IVF and is infertile, and the man is childless by circumstance. But through the drama, which lasted an hour, at the end, it was well received by 95% of the pro-natalist community. And so I think some realization took place. So that was really nice, unexpected bonus.
It sounds like the people
Michael,
who, sorry,
Michael, you're not a stranger
yeah.
in the room at all.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it sounds like the people who came to that play were really interested in finding out more, which is a great place to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm also curious to know what would men like other men to know around this whole topic of do you have kids? And Michael, you're very proactive in this area. And you're a great advocate for us. You run the Full Stop podcast, and you also run one of the only male childless support groups. Am I correct?
Oh, look, I can't say if it's the only one, but it's the Childless Men's Community. It's got about 400 members from around the world now. Run it is probably not a good. It's just a peer support group, so it's pretty much we just monitor who says what really, and the support comes from the members on the inside. But so you asking the question about what we want other childless men to know? Is that okay? Look, the very first thing is you're not alone. The problem, one of the biggest comments we get when new people come into the men's group, I thought I was the only one. Thank God I found this place. Because if you look at the childless community as a whole, now I know there are other groups that have men in them, but when you look at the childless community as a whole, it's very female focused. And so men aren't seen, and sometimes they feel like they're not worthy of being seen, because if you take IVF as an example, all we've got to do really is provide the swimmers. The poor woman goes through the egg pickup and the drug what's the word I'm looking for, and the stimulation, that's it, and the drug stimulation. We see all that and we think, what are we complaining about? And so we feel quite, and then of course if you're a male that doesn't produce sperm, then of course you're not feeling like a man. That's really how what goes on in a lot of their minds. But we've had a conversation like that in the men's group very recently, and that person got pounced on from a great height because that's not the measure of a man. The measure of a man is if you've got courage. A measure of a man is if you've got integrity balanced with empathy and compassion. They are good measures of a man. And so that's what I'd like other childless men to think about is it's not the be all and end all. There are much more valuable aspects of being a man.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Robert, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, just that's great. But I'm thinking of Storyhouse Chester this year. There were, just when the ratio of men attending to women seemed to be improving in previous years, it dropped right back down. There were hardly any men there this year, less than 20, I think, out of 200 or so. And that was a complete surprise because I thought I know Storyhouse is only one event out of a number of events now for the childless community, but that's a shame. In fact, after last year, which was also quite poorly attended by guys, I said to the organizer, if you like, I'm in touch with some men's groups. Would you like me to try and tell them about Story House for next year? And they said, yes, do what you can. And I made some contacts with men's groups in and around the country, particularly Chester, particularly Manchester and Liverpool, which is because of the cost of going to a conference like that and accommodation and transport and everything. It makes sense for people to be reasonably nearby. Um, and some of them might have shown interest in the first place, but then just sort of kind of didn't get it, and it just came to nothing. So it was a complete failure. I don't want to sound a negative note, but it's a real uphill task to get men acknowledging this and talking about it. Still,
But I think we're starting to plant the seeds. I think men are starting to become a little bit more, like Michael says, they're not alone.
yeah.
I know that on LinkedIn, I've seen quite a few conversations around male childlessness. I've connected with a few people who've been talking about it. I think there is change, but it is going to take time because again, and I think Robin, you've spoken about this in one of your papers. Men being childless is not as obvious because if a woman is childless, everybody knows because, we haven't seen you pregnant, we haven't seen you carrying a baby and walking around. But men being childless can be quite invisible.
Yeah, and I think part of that just ties in with that societal thing that men are fully fertile from puberty until death, and men aren't bothered, they don't care, and that's just such an easy narrative to occupy. But also, you have to, I think, appreciate how men come to not communicate emotionally so well until there's a need for them to do so, and they have to go to counselling or they learn how to do it. And that comes to really, I think, how you're raised. And so I'm raised in the 60s, very traditional working class thing. And that's very much you're validated outside your body, which is what I said before, not inside you. And you're disconnected from your emotions. But that's placed in you when a baby's born. Can we assume that whatever their sex/gender is, they've got the same emotional capacity, everything being equal in that? Then what happens? That men are something's placed in them that makes it a struggle for them to express themselves verbally and connected to what's happening inside to the outside rather than through actions. So when I was doing my counselor training, one of the things was for men, poetry, art, doing things was one of the better ways to get them to respond and to open up rather than saying, how do you feel? Because when you say, how do you feel? You're cutting through to something they've been conditioned not to do over decades. And when I was doing my initial counseling, I used to say that, but soon learned not to because you could see the men struggling to say, well, how do I feel? I'm not quite sure. And I'm also not quite sure whether I should tell you. So, and quite often those emotions are so intense, what they don't want to do is hurt you and flood you in that respect. They don't want to be a volcano.
Yep.
Yep. But on a just a sort of aside, on a more optimistic note, one very simple thing. I was really surprised to see BBC One have got a new serial on called Trying, which is about a young couple who are trying to have a baby, and it started this week, and I saw the first episode. It might well be worth, people might get something out of that. It was rather sensitively done with humour. So that's something called Trying on mainstream telly at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I can't remember which day, midweek or something. Just by the way.
Was that on the UK? Was it on Netflix
No,
or
it's BBC One.
BBC One?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
but people outside the UK might be able to get it through some streaming channel or
Yeah.
pay for view thing.
Mm.
There's a really interesting little short film by Rod Silvers called England Expects that describes a man's experience of going through infertility treatment with his partner, and it's only about 12 minutes long, and it's you get an awful lot of insight into the things he faces and his the things that happen to him and his views. So England Expects, that's on YouTube.
Okay, I have to have a look at it. I've just noticed the time, and we can probably keep chatting for ages. Um, but yeah, this has been so interesting for me, and I hope the people who are listening to this have got some takeaways, and you've also found this very interesting. So, navigating the black hole of the heart when asked, "Do you have kids?" My takeaway from chatting with you, gentlemen, is to learn to be a little bit more brave when I'm asked that question for two reasons: to advocate for our community and to educate the people around inclusion and understanding how that question can be triggering. If you guys would like to share some of your takeaways.
Just it's good to be part of the conversation, and I agree with you, Anne, that um, there's lots of hope out there, and um, despite what I'm saying about the fewer men at the Storyhouse Festival, um, there is a growing, um, particularly articles in the press about all the different complexities of being childless, not by choice. So things are slowly moving to it being a part of the agenda. Yeah.
Rob, you want to go?
I will do, Michael. Thanks for that invite. I was about to say the same thing to you. Yeah, I think there is stuff out there. Arm yourself with some facts. If you don't want to reveal yourself, just like there's more childless men than there's childless women, and that men are emotional too. But part of their emotional thing is that the paradox is they struggle to express their emotions verbally, but through actions. And on the other side of the black hole, there might well be a light hole. And circling the black hole, the black hole is dense energy, isn't it? I
Yep.
And you can maybe extract some of that energy to spin yourself away to another journey.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things in science fiction. While a black hole is something that you fear, sometimes you don't know what's on the other side of it. It could be a whole wonderful new experience, and we need to be brave. So again, I know I've used that word quite a lot, but kind of I think that's my word from all of this, to be a bit more brave. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, yeah, learn to be courageous. And that comes with telling your story. Practice it. Talk to people about it. Don't be afraid of it, because it's when you get used to that, when you need to normalize your story, get used to it, and then you can go out in the big wide world and tell it. So that's what I do. I beat people over the head with it, because the thing is, if we as a community don't talk about it, nothing will change. Nothing.
Yep.
And so when you're thinking about your story, now I appreciate that it is hard. There's no doubt it's a shit sandwich. You can't look at it any other way. But if we don't talk about it, nothing will change. So be courageous. And if it's a heavyweight, get help. I'll go on forever, so I'll stop there.
I'm with Michael there. Yeah, normalizing the extraordinary, and we are each individually an extraordinary being. And telling our stories and preparing that, you're really helping yourself. If you hear yourself and you hear your story, that can be very, very moving. And you hear other people's stories, and you will find that shared experience in the humanity of each other.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming along and for all the questions and comments. That's been really, really awesome.
Well said,
thank you,
Michael.
everybody who's joined us. We would love to get more feedback. So if you would like to maybe just send Stephanie email, or just comment on the YouTube replay when this goes up, that will be fantastic. And thank you to my wonderful panel here. It's been such a great experience sharing this time with you guys. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers.